The 5 things I hate about my Everlast TIG welder. Yes, it's a clickbait title, but I think it's appropriate because though I overall really like that welding machine, it's also got some quirks that are pretty annoying. Let's get into it. Number 1. This thing has a cooling fan that when you turn the switch on, it comes on and it's always on. Other TIG machines probably, I'm pretty sure, have a thermostat, and when parts of the machine actually get hot, then it would turn on the fan and it would cycle, or they might have a fan that's generally quieter, but this one has a fan that's very loud and it's always on, and I'm not the only person to complain about this. I've read that about this machine from other people, but yeah, it's just annoying. It's not really a big deal, but it kind of grates on me. I wish that it was a little bit quieter because TIG welding is such a peaceful and detail-oriented process, and this feels like such a industrial kind. It just doesn't need this. It's kind of rough around the edges. Number 2, this LCD display I think is. I don't know if this is actually broken on my machine. I think it's just bad design, but this particular model that I have, this doesn't display the peak amps. It displays what the potentiometer in the pedal, which is plugged in, what percentage of the amps you get. And so right now the foot pedal is plugged in and it says 8 amps on here. Even though the amperage dial, you can turn it up and down, it doesn't reflect on the screen. Every other TIG welder that I've ever seen, when you turn this up, what this reads is it shows you the peak amps, so that if you were to mash the pedal all the way down, or if you were to use the 2T function or whatever, whichever one it is, so that you had a torch switch, you would be reading the peak amps here and not the instantaneous amps. This one shows you whatever you're at, and the only time it would show you, a higher number is while the pedal is down, which is when you're looking at your weld puddle. So if I wanted to know, so that I could record my settings and come back to them later, if I wanted to know how many amps it's set up for right now, I have to actually unplug the cable that goes to the pedal. Now it says I'm at 117 amps, or I can turn it down to 74, 48, whatever. I can change the number, and so you have to always unplug this the foot pedal cable in order to read the peak amps. I think nobody else designs a TIG machine like this. It's totally obnoxious. I don't like it. Number 3 is poor arc starts. If you have the pulser turned off, then when you go to start the arc, it generally does a pretty good job. The high frequency start, when you step on the pedal, it does whatever it does, and then you get your arc pretty quickly, and even at a lower amperage you can start pretty controlled. But if you turn on the pulser, it really has a harder time for me getting that arc initiated. I don't know if that's across the board whenever you use a pulser on any machine, but I found that to be true on this machine. So when I'm just tacking the frame and I'm not even doing full welds, I'll turn the pulser off because all I'm doing is quick little starts. But then when I'm actually welding it out, I turn the pulser on, and it just makes the arc starts a little bit trickier. It's not really that big of a deal in practice, but it's annoying. I wish it started a little bit cleaner and crisper for me. Number 4, the analog interface on here is kind of annoying. So what I like about the analog interface is that you have a dial for each different thing. You don't have to go inside of a menu to pull up the parameter you want to change, and then some machines everything is hidden in a menu, and then you use one dial to make your changes, and you have to pull it up in the menu in order to change things. I like that there's a dial for everything. What I don't like is that you don't get a number for any of them, and so for some of those it can be hard to document exactly what your setting is to return to it later, because you have to read between the lines, and it's not like a dial indicator or something where the lines are actually graduated. If you look at a lot of these, there's not actually numbers at the tick marks, and so you have to there's 0, there's 5, and now you have to subdivide it by the number of tick marks. It makes it pretty tedious to figure out what your settings are and record those. And the one that's particularly obnoxious is on the pulse one. You have your pulse frequency, your pulse amps, and your pulse on time. And so for all of these, you can kind of get a sense of it. But for pulse frequency, if you wanted to tell someone else how many pulses per second you had, it's really hard to figure it out. you actually, what I've done is I've downloaded a metronome app onto my phone, and then I will listen to the pulse, and I'll try and figure out what beats per minute it's at, and then I have to convert beats per minute into pulses per second with, divide by 60. It's a pain in the ass, and if it had a digital display, it would give you an actual number. And so that would be one of the big benefits of a welding machine that was fully digital, or one that you could even save presets, is it would have actual numbers associated. And I think if this was a better designed user interface, it would at least have numbers along the dials so that you had associated numbers, but it doesn't have them. And so it's fine, you can get by with it just fine, but it's a pain in the butt. And somebody says, oh yeah, I like to weld with these pulse settings at 1.2 pulses per second, and then it takes me like 10 minutes to get 1.2 pulses per second figured out because this thing doesn't tell you any sort of numbers. You know, the dial here goes from 0.2 pulses per second to 20 on low frequency pulse, and then it goes from 20 to 250. So if you have a particular number that you're trying to hit, the only way to get it is like with like a metronome or something, and then compare, and it's ridiculous. You know, like there should be a better way to do it. Number 5, this thing is windy. So not only does it have a loud fan that's always on, it pushes quite a bit of air out of here. So I mean, we don't want the internals to overheat. We don't want this thing to fail because parts got too hot and fried, but it pushes a lot of wind, and I have a small shop and I want to be within arm's reach of this machine basically. And so when you're trying to create a welding environment where your argon is actually covering the material, you don't want wind blowing around, and I can feel it standing over here on my arm. I can feel there's wind coming out of the front of the machine and out of this part here. And so what I would do to combat that from creating issues for me is I have this little book here, How to Run a Lathe by the South Bend Lathe Company. I didn't find this particularly useful as a text, to be honest, but I would lean it up against here. Now, the fan is powerful enough to displace air out of the chassis of the machine. I'm not worried about it overheating, but this way it's at least diverting the air and it's not pushing it toward my welding environment. And you have to think about how to keep this wind from making issues for you. And so, you know, all these problems have solutions, but they're just kind of a pain in the ass, and I imagine a more thoughtfully designed, more quality welder wouldn't have all these same issues. I can't really count this as one of the 5 gripes because this is just me being a total dumbass, but this machine came with this argon flow regulator, and I bought this one later, and I didn't realize for years that this is liters per minute, whereas everyone in the United States talks about cubic feet per hour, right? CFH. And so the units, it's something like a 2 to 1. I'll throw it up on the screen. The conversion is dirt simple. It's so easy. It just never crossed my mind that I might be looking at it in the wrong units. What happens is that I had this jacked way up, right? And so when you apply more gas, you have the ability sometimes to get better shielding and better coverage, and it costs you more money. And I had so much flow that it was decreasing the performance. It's coming out so quickly that it becomes kind of turbulent and it stirs in the atmosphere in with the argon. And so because I was such a dumbass, I was wasting money on argon and I was getting poorer performance. And when I learned that, and you know, that's one of those things where if you learn from someone who knows what they're doing versus I learned on the internet mainly through watching welding tips and tricks YouTube videos and that sort of thing, when you learn from a human who really knows what they're doing and they're looking over your shoulder, they'd say, you got your gas cranked up way too high. But I didn't really know what to look for, and so just some of those learning curves just take a lot longer when you're working alone. Don't make that same mistake. If you buy an Everlast or any other machine, just look at the units on the thing, and then when you hear a number from someone else about what setting they like, I also could have solved that problem if I just would have played with it more often. But when you're new to it, there's a lot of variables, and it can take you a while to suss out, where you need to be on all those things. It's easier to just take a number from somebody and run with that for a while. And I made the mistake of just not even checking the units. So overall, I would say that buying that machine in 2014 was a really good decision. It hasn't let me down once. I haven't had any repair issues. I haven't had anything that I couldn't get welded. I mean, it's a DC only machine, so I can't weld aluminum, but generally it's really good for the money. These things are little, gripes, and I imagine even nicer machines have some of these gripes. I was just talking to my friend Austin about his Lincoln, and he said that you can't control the post flow of gas, that when you stop your arc, you should be able to, on most machines, control how long the gas stays on before it shuts off, so that if you're doing quick and dirty work, you do a short post flow, and if you're doing sensitive work like titanium, you do a really long post flow. Gas is expensive. You don't want to use more than you need to, but you do need enough. And so talking to him about that, I realized that actually there's things about this machine that are better than some more expensive machines, that it has that feature that not every machine has. And so I think the point is, when you're buying a machine, don't assume it has any features that you're familiar with. Really look at pictures of the control panel, look at the technical specs, the duty cycle, that sort of thing. If you have any experience from a welding class or anything else, apply that critically. Don't assume that it has any features, because it might not, and don't assume that everything works the way that you would want it to. They don't make this model of machine anymore, but they make some other ones, and so I went on the Everlast Welders website and I compared, and they have some that I think are even a better value now than when I bought this one a couple years ago. They have most of the same features, and I would pull up a picture of the front panel to get a sense of that. Yeah, overall, really good machine. The arc control and all that stuff seems to work pretty well. I haven't had issues controlling stuff, getting the just good welds have come out of this. And I would say, even if this machine like blew up tomorrow and every single part of it was toast and couldn't get any help from Everlast, I paid $700 for the machine itself a little over 4 years ago. I've welded not even that many bikes, like 10 bikes or something with it, and I'm sure I could have welded a lot more, and it'll probably last a long time. But if I had to pay that amount of money to develop the amount of skill and experience that I did and to do that many good welds, that's not a ridiculous waste of money. You could spend 5 times as much for like a new Miller Maxstar welder or a Dynasty welder or something that is more feature rich and it's from a brand name, and there's maybe some nicer things about it. But for the price of entry to get a machine in your shop to start practicing and making good welds, even if it didn't last for 30 years, if it lasts a handful of years, that might be worth something, and I'm pretty sure it will last quite a bit longer. I've been mostly happy with it, and I just wanted to share some of these gripes. Thanks for watching, and hit that frickin' subscribe button. Thanks.